Delegate Shank. I'm the Minority Whip of the Republican Caucus. With me today is Republican Gail from Howard County. Welcome to the Minority Report. This week we're going to talk about House Bill 101, the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act, otherwise known as the BRFA. Gail, tell us why the Budget Reconciliation Act of 2009 is not a very good idea.
Well, over the years, the legislature cannot put money into the budget, but they provide mandates that the governor has to put certain things in. And what happens then when either times are tough or the governor wants to change priorities, he begins to cut those mandates. So we may say, put money into community colleges at a certain rate. He can say, no, I'm not going to put it in at that rate, but he has to do it through this bill that begins to change the policy decisions we've made.
One of the things that I've always thought about these Budget Reconciliations Acts that really disturbs me, with all the talk about the stimulus at the federal level, is there's a real lack of transparency about this. We're making a lot of policy decisions that the General Assembly over the years has made with one piece of legislation that, just like the stimulus, the American people, the citizens of the state of Maryland should have the opportunity to come down here on a separate piece of legislation and should have the opportunity to take a look at what this legislation does in all the different committees and have that opportunity to say their piece. This is just one big bill. I bet it's a couple hundred pages. They should really have that opportunity to take and have their say, shouldn't
Right.
they?
We have a one subject rule for a good reason, because it gives you a time to really pursue that subject, get all the ins and outs. And this is, like the federal government, they call it an omnibus bill. I mean, it has a little of everything. There's some pain enough to suffer for
There's
everyone.
everything from local waterway improvements to coal tax to everything else like this in this piece of legislation. I find it kind of ironic that you had a little amendment to a piece of legislation dealing with the parental consent on a tattoo, and you had a very good amendment dealing with the parental consent to have an abortion. And we couldn't even debate that on the House floor because they said it violated the single subject rule. But yet here in this bill dealing with budget reconciliation and all these vast different public policy issues, somehow they managed to find that constitutional.
Some of the adjustments, it's been used in the past where some of the adjustments are just temporary. We have a serious problem this year, so we'll temporarily halt this, that, or the other. What is troubling here, we have a number of formula changes that are permanent, made permanent in this bill. This bill can be vetoed, but most likely would not, because most of it was the governor's request. But there's permanent, there's temporary, there's fund swaps. That they can have it both ways. We have the money in the budget, but we're taking it out. We make cuts, but we're just moving money from one fund to another. Those are troubling. We had about $600 million, actually getting down to some minutia, of fund swaps. And those are called cuts by some people. To me, it's still spending.
We're really, in many ways, robbing Peter to pay Paul in this issue as well, perpetuating the ongoing fiscal crisis. And there's a lot of trying to shift the burden back to some of the local governments here, saying that we're cutting the budget, but in fact, won't this have some effect in causing the local governments to possibly raise their property taxes as well?
Absolutely. There are a number of formula or payment that the state had made for services that they're now saying, well, the local government shares in that, so we're going to make them pay part. They have dumped to the local governments the keeping of prisoners, for instance, up to 18 months. It used to be 6 months. Now we keep state prisoners up to 18 months. And the state's supposed to pay for that, and they're really cutting seriously into the amount that they're going to pay. That's a course cost is going to have to be absorbed by the local government.
I'm hearing from some of my constituents back home that the cigarette restitution fund, which is very important, that goes for cancer prevention as well, that was cut as well.
One of the other troubling things about the BRFA, as some people call it, is that once the House decides one thing, the Senate decides another. Once it goes to conference committee, anything and everything can be added to it. So again, it's a very comprehensive bill, and you get a lot of things added at the last minute that were never, ever discussed in committee, and that's a frightening, that's a frightening thing. It's a vehicle that they can do a lot of damage with.
Well, thanks, Gail. Really, the people need to be very closely attuned to this piece of legislation. Transparency is something that we're very concerned about, that we need you folks back home to be very tuned into this issue. Gail Bates, the other Republicans on appropriations, are taking a good look at this. Thanks for tuning in to another week of the Minority Report, and we appreciate you joining us this week. Thanks, Gail.
Oh, you're welcome.